All right, next is the temperate deciduous forests. These are going to be found, they have a much more moderate climate with a relatively high rainfall. They're going to be found just south of the taiga in the in eastern North America, eastern Asia, and much of Europe. These are going to have a relatively moderate climate, relatively high rainfall with pretty well-defined seasons. So there's going to be really long growing seasons and a fair amount of sunshine year-round. In this case, the trees are going to have broad leaves that fall off in the winter. And so I would love for you guys to just take a moment before you go on to the next slide and think about that. Why have we adapted to have trees that have broad leaves that fall off during the winter time? What possible benefit would that have for the plants and for the trees if they have broad leaves that fall off during the winter months and have to be regrown every spring? So here's some pictures of our temperate deciduous forest. That's going to be sort of the northeastern part of the U.S., Europe, and then the eastern parts of Asia. So life in the deciduous forest, we're going to see that for our for our producers, we're going to have a lot of trees. This is because we have really long growing seasons and a fair amount of rain that can support these trees, these large producers. So we're going to see things like oak, beech, sycamore, maple. These are going to have broad leaves that fall off in the winter and regrow in the spring. Huge benefit of this. Actually, no, I'm going to save that for our discussion question. So we're going to talk about that in our discussion groups. So come prepared to discuss why we have broad leaves that fall off in the wintertime and have to be regrown every spring. The tallest trees we're going to find are going to form a canopy, an upper layer of leaves that are the very first to receive the sunlight. Now there's still enough light that can penetrate this canopy layer to form another layer of trees just below that that's going to be called the understory. And beneath those trees, there's going to be shrubs, herbaceous plants that can flower in the spring before the trees grow leaves. Beneath the shrub layer, we're going to find mosses and lichens. So this stratification, the fact that we've got producers at sort of every level all the way down means, this is going to greatly affect our animals. It means that we're going to have a lot of ground animals, small animals that can survive on the ground, but also can climb in the trees to access things like nuts and seeds, fruits. So we're going to see a lot of ground animals like squirrels, rabbits, woodchucks, chipmunks, ground birds like turkey, grouse, pheasants, lots of reptiles and amphibians. And so because of that, we're going to also see things like our carnivores are going to be things like bears or bobcats, things that are going to prey on those smaller animals. We're also going to see very rich soils. We're going to have really rich soil. Minerals are going to get washed deep into the ground by those plentiful rains, but those minerals are also brought back up to the surface by those trees that are going to have deep roots that can reach all of those minerals and bring them back up. Next is going to be our tropical rainforests. The tropical rainforests are going to be typically found near the equator. They're going to be characterized by weather that is warm year-round with plenty of rainfall and very long days of sunlight. Now, these are going to be some of the richest land biomes. It is estimated that 50% of the variety of species found on Earth are going to live in the tropical rainforests. So here is going to be sort of what the tropical rainforest is going to look like. Now, the vegetation on the forest floor tends to be pretty sparse because most of the sunlight is filtered out by the upper stories. So what we have, because we have incredibly long growing seasons, I mean very, very long, pretty much year-round is a growing season. That means there's year-round sunlight. Not only is there year-round sunlight, but there is constant daily rain, which means that we're going to have lots and lots of time and ability to grow. So because of that, the trees are going to grow very, very tall. They're going to be competing for sunlight because everybody has an abundance. There's an abundance of sunlight. There's an abundance of rain. Now it's just a matter of space. And so we're going to see lots of very tall trees that really they don't bother to put out leaves until they reach the very top. They're not going to have leaves all the way down because there's not a whole lot of light that filters down. We're going to see really, really very dense vegetation. Because all of that light is going to be, most of the light's going to be taken out in the canopy, the rest is going to be filtered through the understory by the time we get to the ground, we're going to see very little sunlight. Usually we're going to find smaller plants that are accustomed to life in the shade, things like ferns. Ferns love a lot of shade. We're also going to see that the upper levels tend to be the most productive levels. Trees are going to have to grow very tall in order to compete for sunlight. So a lot of times these trees, their primary goal is going to be to grow tall and then grow strong. But they're going to need to be tall in order to access the sunlight. And the way that they do this is by growing very tall and then producing lianas. Lianas are going to be woody vines that are going to grow down from the upper branches, wrap around the trees, and strengthen and support the structure of the tree. As the tree grows taller, it's also going to grow in strength. So the tropical forests, like I said, they're going to have a very complex structure with a forest floor, understory, and canopy. Now, because all of the vegetation is in the tree, the animals are going to have to live in the tree. So all the producers that are up really high, that means the consumers are going to have to be adapted for life in the trees as well. We're going to see lots and lots of animals, almost an insane amount of insects, lots and lots of insects, all of which are going to be adapted for life in the upper stories where all of the vegetation is plentiful. So abundant insect life, we're going to see lots and lots of insects found in the upper trees. We're going to see lots of frogs, lots of amphibians found in the upper trees. Termites are going to play an insanely important role in the ecosystem of the rainforest. They are going to be necessary to decompose the woody plant material. Ants are going to be found everywhere, particularly in the trees. We're going to see lots and lots of ants and ant colonies that spend their entire lives living in the upper branches of the trees because this is where all the vegetation is. So because all of the vegetation is in the trees, we're going to see that the primary consumers are going to be things like insects. We're also going to see birds, lots of birds, hummingbirds, parakeets, parrots, toucans, all very brightly colored. The main reason we're going to see lots of brightly colored birds and insects is because there is so much vegetation. The temperature is good, the climate is good, the food is plentiful, the sunshine is abundant, the rain is everywhere. We're going to see that the primary goal for most of these organisms is not necessarily going to be survival, but sexual selection. So we're going to see lots of bright colors, lots of interesting mating dances and mating rituals, because the primary goal, life is easy. Survival, I should say. Survival is somewhat easy. Mating, not so much. So because that's where all of our smaller organisms are going to be, we're also going to see things like lemurs, sloths, monkeys. Those are going to be the primates that feed on the fruit of the trees. We're also going to see that the carnivores that eat those birds, those monkeys, those primates, the largest carnivores are going to be cats. Jaguars in South America, leopards in Africa and Asia. They're going to be cats. They're going to be animals that may not spend their whole lives in the trees, but they can certainly hunt in a tree. They can climb up very quickly. They can sleep in a tree. They are going to be large because all of our herbivores are adapted for tree life. All of our carnivores are as well. So there you go. There's an example of how the climate affects the producer level, affects the primary consumer level, affects the secondary consumer level. So interestingly enough, not only do most of the animals spend their whole lives in trees, but a lot of plants do as well. These are going to be known as epiphytes. These are plants that grow on other plants, but they have roots of their own which can absorb nutrients and moisture out of the air. So a great example of this would be like bromeliads, like pineapples, orchids, and ferns. They can actually grow on a tree with roots that are simply hanging out in midair to catch moisture from the rain and humidity. So these are our epiphytes. Some are going to also catch rain by forming vases or bowls with their overlapping leaves. Pitcher plants are going to catch water in the trees. Now, the odd thing about all of this is the soil is actually going to be nutrient poor. With all of this abundance, with all of this species diversity and species richness, we would maybe expect the soil to be very rich as well. However, the soil is actually going to be nutrient poor. This is because we are growing so quickly. We have a huge rapid recycling of nutrients. Seeds, plants, leaves, those are going to be consumed up in the upper stories by insects and birds and herbivores. What little leaf litter makes it down below that is going to be quickly consumed by termites and insects on the forest floor. Very little of those nutrients are actually going to make it down into the soil. So we have such a rapid recycling of nutrients, and as soon as those nutrients do make it into the soil, they're rapidly taken up by the trees and by the large plants that are there. So there's going to be such a rapid recycling of nutrients that generally speaking the soil is going to be pretty nutrient poor. But our productivity is so high, so much, because we have year-round sun and a never-ending supply of rain. So we're going to see very high productivity in the tropical rainforest. All right, moving out from the tropical rainforests, we are going to move into the region of the shrublands. These regions are going to tend to have very dry summers and very wet winters. So in general, the shrubs are going to be shorter than the trees with woody persistent stems, but no large central trunk. They tend to have very small but thick evergreen leaves, which are often coated in a waxy material to help prevent the loss of moisture. They're going to have thick underground roots which can survive dry summers and frequent fires and take moisture from deep within the soil. They're adapted to withstand the arid conditions, and they can quickly sprout new growth after fires. This is really important in the state of both primary and secondary succession. We want to have growth. There's also going to be the dense shrubland in California known as the chaparral. It lacks an understory, and the ground litter is going to be extremely highly flammable. Now, the seeds of many species that are found in this area are going to require the heat and the scarring action of fire to induce germination. A lot of shrubs are actually going to sprout from their roots after fires, and a lot of the animals found here are going to include mule deer, rodents, lizards, and greater roadrunners. So I have a discussion question for you that I would like to pose. Why would the plants found in this highly flammable region have seeds that will only sprout after a fire or in the presence of a fire? There are a lot of species of plants that require the blistering action of the heat from a fire in order to germinate their seeds. Why? What benefit does that provide? What would be the purpose of natural selection coming up with a seed that requires fire? So that's my discussion question for you. We'll talk about that maybe in our discussion groups, but be thinking about that. Maybe bring that question to our discussion groups in the evening. Grasslands. Grasslands are going to be another region. These are going to occur where their annual rainfall is great. You know what? I'm going to pause for just a moment. We're going to pick up with grasslands in our next video because I have a feeling it's going to be a little bit of a longer one. So we're going to pause right here. Think about that question about the shrubs found in the chaparral regions, and we will come back to the grasslands in our next video.